Aloha and welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Lynette Cruz, I'm your host. And today, as every time I have a program, I think I have these fabulous guests, but today I have two really interesting people. To my right is Dr. Federico Lenzerini, and to his right is Dr. Keanu Tsai. And today's topic is about the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the Larson case as well. And before we get to that, how about you introduce yourself to us?
Thank you. Mahalo. Aloha to everybody. Yes, I am Federico Lenzerini, PhD and Professor of International Law at the University of Siena in Italy. And I have been a representative of my government, of the Italian government, at negotiations concerning the protection of cultural heritage. I am consultant to UNESCO, and I have been working very intensively with indigenous peoples all over the world. And today is a very special day for me because I'm here, in a way.
Special day for us too.
Well, I'm glad about that. I'm here thanks to Dr. Keanu Tsai. I met him about 3 months ago, and to be honest, I had no idea about the history of Hawaii. And I had no idea about what was behind the fact that we usually say that Hawaii is the 50 states of the United States of America. And thanks to Keanu, I was able to deeply enter into the history of Hawaii, and now I think I am on board in this Larson case before the Permanent Court of Arbitration.
And we are happy to hear it. Thank you for being here today. Keanu, you want to introduce yourself too?
Well, I'm Keanu Tsai, born and raised on Oahu. I currently live on Hawaii Island. So I'm a political scientist. I specialize in international relations and public law. My particular focus of research and articles, whether law review or peer review, focused on Hawaii's continued existence as a country under international law, which currently is under the law of occupation, or what we call in international law, humanitarian law.
You want to share how it is that you came to connect with each other?
Yeah, Federico and I, we just met 3 months ago. And it's like we're the best of friends, as if we've been friends for a long time. I first met Federico when I gave a presentation at the University of Siena. Well, actually, no, in Ravenna.
It was in Ravenna, yes.
Ravenna. Was part of a conference, academic conference. And we just started to talk, and I was sharing with him, well, he saw my presentation. He had questions, and like, you know, naturally everyone would have questions when it's the first time you would hear this.
New information.
Yes.
And it was good for Federico because he took a look at it, and at first he said, no. And that got him to say, why is he saying this? And that's what started a dialogue. We had, remember the lunch we had with all the speakers? And we were talking, and it even got to a point where he went, no, it's this way. I said, no, it's this way. So, but it was like two academics talking to each other. Yeah.
It's usual. I mean, you're never in agreement on everything, no? But it was funny the same way, because that conference was a conference about the rights of indigenous peoples. I told you that I am specialized on that field. And yes, Keanu was the first to give a presentation, and the first thing he said is that Hawaiian people are not indigenous.
What a shock.
Yes, no, it was not a shock, but I was thinking by myself, what is this guy talking about? I mean, and it was, it opened my mind in a way. I mean, as teachers, as professors, I think that our first duty is to learn day after day, to be honest with our students. We are not so different from students, no? Because students go to school and to the university to learn. But professors, in order to teach, they have first to learn.
We like to think so, but yes.
And we should keep our mind open day after day, because we can learn much from any person in the world. And especially in this case, I mean, knowing Keanu opened a new world for me.
That's good to hear. Okay, so we're actually moving along to find out why you're here. Why are you here?
Well, I'm here because, as I said, I am on board with Keanu in this Latsen case in front of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. But this is not just, I would say, a working relationship, because I can assure you that I do things only if I believe in them. And when I heard the history of the Hawaiian Kingdom, I was immediately convinced to be part of this game.
So happy to hear it.
You know, when after Ravenna, I then went to Siena, and that's where I presented, gave a lecture when Federico, and there was another professor there, her class, and it was on international law, this class. And it was a time when he and I, outside of Ravenna, could actually just talk after. And we went up to his office, and we came to an agreement that we should write an article, co-author an article, to be published by the European Journal of International Law or some other journal, but within Europe, and then get it translated into Italian with the specific purpose of education, to educate the people of Europe, in particular Italy, about the Hawaiian Kingdom. So we began to work on that, and that's when Federico, we were just putting our thoughts together. We didn't start it at that time, but we thought about it. Now, when I presented Hawaii's history in Italy, it was called The American Occupation of Hawaii, Genocide Through Americanization. And at the end of the presentation, I brought that history to the relevant point of today, that there was a case called the Larson case at the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and that basically Lance Larson was not able to proceed on allegations he made against the Hawaiian Kingdom for not protecting him because of the absence of the United States. This was what was called the indispensable third-party rule. Okay, and that was a burden of Lance Larson, not the Hawaiian Kingdom. In this case, it was Lance Larson versus the Hawaiian Kingdom. We were the defendants. But the arbitrators, in its arbitration award, said that there is a possibility to address other issues, such as duties and responsibilities, through fact-finding that may or may not involve the indispensable third party. But they provided that avenue for the parties to take. So we initiated the Fact-Finding Commission of Inquiry according to the rules back in August. So when I was in Ravenna, what month was that?
October.
October. So when I was in Ravenna, I spoke to the process. It had begun. Okay. Now, we did not move quickly on that because Lance Larson did not have legal representation. And this process to establish a commission of inquiry was specific to what is, for an inquiry, a commission to answer or provide a report, what is the duty and obligation of the Hawaiian government, the Hawaiian Kingdom, within the framework of international humanitarian law, because there are so many other variables that are now put into our situation other than just clearly Hawaiian law, which we knew. There are other laws, other principles. So this next step of the International Commission of Inquiry, according to the agreement, once they make that report, then it goes to what is the duty and responsibility of the Hawaiian Kingdom toward Lance Larson, and by extension, to all Hawaiian subjects and even aliens, non-nationals who are in Hawaii affected by the occupation. But Lance did not have legal representation. So when I returned home from Italy, we had finally secured legal representation for Lance Larson, because we knew it will be very complex, very procedural, so we needed to ensure that his rights were looked after by a competent person. So he has legal representation, and that opened up a space on my legal team to bring in someone that could help me as a legal counsel, someone with expertise in these areas. And I quickly thought of Federico because we had already met and what we talked about. So that prompted me, let's say about a month and a half ago, about a month and a half, yeah, December. Yeah.
Yes.
I made a plan to fly back to Siena via Florence, but I did not share with Federico my purpose, the reason. I said we will discuss our article, also the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and what took place, and yeah. So I arrived. We met. We had coffee at a cafe, and the first thing I mentioned to Federico, this is my reason why I'm here. And he was shocked because he thought he knew the reason.
Well, I was not so shocked because I was wondering, I mean, Keanu is coming here only to talk about the article.
Yeah.
He's flying to Italy from Hawaii. I mean, it's a long way.
I mean, we can work on the article by email.
Yes, we can have telephone conversations and Skype.
Yeah.
So I was quite surprised. Yes. So maybe I was imagining that there might be another reason.
Did you think it was that reason? No.
Honestly, not.
So I asked him. So I said, okay, so Federico, I'm here to see if you would like to be a part of my legal team in the Fact-Finding Commission of Inquiry at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Now, before Federico could answer, because I didn't want an answer on that first day we had coffee, I intended to have that time. I had 4 days to be there, to be able to answer any question he has. So I didn't want to rush into it. I just wanted to be upfront and say, this is why I'm here. And I would never try to sell information to a person like Federico to try to join something. I needed it to be self-evident. He needed to see it for himself. And from my experience with Federico when I was there before, he has a very high level of responsibility, and I would also say humility. And I know he wouldn't get into anything that he wouldn't be comfortable with. So I said, I don't want an answer now, but this is why I'm here. And here's some information, preliminary information for you to review. So there was a brief that I drafted, which was footnoted in the War Report of 2014 out of Geneva, called The Continuity of the Hawaiian Kingdom and the Legitimacy of the Acting Government. And then I provided him a copy of the arbitration award from the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And this one was actually from the International Law Reports, that version. And the rules of fact-finding, the optional rules, and also the special agreement that we had entered into with Lance Larson back in August. And that was our starting point. And we met the next day. Federico picked me up, and it pretty much got to the point where he said, I'm in. I accept the offer. And I was very satisfied because I knew that it went through that vetting process, because this was very important for me. This is not getting people to come on board because they believe, but they actually understand. And then we just had a lot of conversations on strategy, tactics, things that we cannot share openly, but just how do we approach this? We're talking more procedural aspects, the next step. Yeah, so I was pleasantly surprised. And I had the opportunity to meet his family, his mom. Italian families are very much like Hawaiian families, very family oriented. And the mom makes some really good ravioli.
That's always helpful.
Yes.
So you both did a presentation on January 30 at the Kamehameha schools, which was really well attended, I know, because I was present. And you discussed some of this stuff, if not all of it, at that presentation. And I think there were some questions that were asked later about clarifications. I'm going to ask one because somebody asked me this, and people are going to ask this all the time. When you talk about humanitarian law, what are you talking about?
Okay. Yes, international humanitarian law is a branch of international law which applies during armed conflict and in the event of military occupation. You know that human beings are protected by the rules on human rights, but traditionally human rights are only applicable in time of peace. Now the situation has changed, but would be too long. But anyway, in times of war, traditionally there was no rule which had to be respected by states. So in the Vienna Congress of 1815, the European powers of the time were reflecting on the opportunity to humanize war to the extent possible, because sometimes in armed conflicts there are cruelties which are not necessary in order to obtain the victory. And of course this led to big pain and suffering for the people. So this new branch of international law started to develop and was defined international humanitarian law because the word humanitarian reminds the idea of treating people in a good way, somehow. And so international humanitarian law is made up of a series of rules which apply in the event of armed conflict, as I said, and military occupation, which protect civilian persons, prisoners of war, properties, etc.
Keanu, how does humanitarian law apply in Hawaii,
Well,
given our history?
so as Federico stated, it applies to international armed conflicts. Now, international armed conflict is a term that has begun to get widespread use, I would say from 1949 on. Prior to that, it was war, the laws of war. Yeah. But war could not explain some things that happened, let's say, during World War I, such as the German occupation of Luxembourg in 1914. Luxembourg was a neutral territory, and Germany conducted attacks into France. Okay. Now, Luxembourg did not resist the German occupation, but by not resisting it did not mean they gave up the country. But then you cannot say Luxembourg was technically at war with Germany. So it created, I guess it prompted a new word to come about called armed conflict. So the armed conflict also includes occupations that take place without resistance, and that's in the Geneva Conventions. So when we speak of the Geneva Conventions and the Hague Conventions, these are treaties, but it's not creating or the creation of new international law, but rather the codification of already a pre-existing customary international law. They just didn't come up with the particular terms. Yeah, so the principles are all there. So for Hawaii, even though the Hague Convention is 1899, but the overthrow of our government was 1893, the unlawful overthrow. What was in the Hague Convention of 1899 was merely a codification of what had existed in 1893. And that's important. So when we were again reoccupied in 1898 during the Spanish-American War, then we have a similar situation like Germany invading Luxembourg to fight the French. Hawaii was invaded, reinvaded again, to fight the Spanish in Guam and the Philippines. This was during the Spanish-American War. So that's why humanitarian law applies in our situation.
Of the things that you've been talking about and that you addressed at Kamehameha schools the other night, which are the things that you think would be most important for us here in Hawaii? Because it seems like most of us are clueless about almost everything. Which are the things that are most important for us to actually understand moving forward?
Well, in my opinion, the most important thing is knowledge. Our presentations did not aim to convince the students about anything. Their purpose was to provide education and knowledge to them in order to know the reality of their history, of their land, of the history of their grandparents and parents, in order to see, then this will be their own choice, but to see whether they want to keep this history alive, to keep their identity alive, their sense of belonging to a people. And of course, then there are many technical things that we could say about that. I think that in order to reach a goal from a given point, we have to proceed step by step. And each step is consequential to the previous one. So it is important that each step is accomplished the right way. At the Kamehameha School, it was important to help the students, who, by the way, are very smart, intelligent, and I realized that from the level of questions they were asking, we see that they're very used to interact with their professors and to express their own idea. But anyway, it was important to help them to the extent that we may help them, but as I was saying earlier, anybody can help anybody in some way, to recover this sense of identity through the knowledge of their history. So this was the main purpose. Then, of course, you should know what's next and what you have to do in order to promote your situation and to achieve the goal that you would like to reach. So again, there are several steps to be accomplished, and in order to do that, you need to know the law and to apply it in the right way. But in these cases, what is important is that people believe, they are convinced about what they want. And in my opinion, this was the fundamental thing that morning.
So Federico was actually referring to, we had two events that was put on by Kamehameha Schools.
Oh, we were only present at one.
Yes, so you folks were at the evening event. Federico was speaking to the day event.
Yes.
And this was over 200 juniors, seniors in high school from the 3 campuses of the Kamehameha Schools and the charter schools on Oahu and throughout the islands. In fact, Kamehameha Schools flew the students in, and they were at the Dole Cannery. And our purpose there in that event was from a very academic standpoint to provide information. So Federico started off his presentation for all these students on what is international law, because many people in Hawaii, including the students, more so all of Hawaii, do not realize how international law is everywhere. It's part of our lives. We just don't know it. And Federico was able to explain that.
The daily life, no?
Daily life, yes.
Everything we do, or almost everything we do, is influenced by international law. For example, if we take a flight or going somewhere, this is possible thanks to international law.
So the students didn't know that. And Federico did a great job in providing that framework. And then he would then provide the point of what was Hawaii under international law in the 19th century. So then after that, the students would break out into groups and they would speak about Federico's presentation on what is international law and what was Hawaii's status under international law. And that's where Federico said they really ask good questions. They're not afraid to ask hard questions. And you know, Federico, you shared with me a point regarding students' questions. Maybe you could share that, because Lynette is a professor as well. But you'll see the difference, I guess, the way the students here learn.
No, I mean, there are different methods of teaching. And in Europe, students sometimes unfortunately, I'm not so used to interact with professors. Probably because, I mean, the responsibility is of professors themselves. Probably because we are not so, we don't have the humility to get close to them and to try to
I'm laughing.
make them feel that there is no such a huge difference between a student and a professor. We are all persons and we make mistakes, and sometimes students think that what professor says is the truth.
I hear you. I have European students as well, and when we engage in discussion, they're always shocked that they actually can speak. And so there's a lot of back and forth, and people are encouraged to say what they think.
Yeah, it's a pity because when, as it happens, for example, in my course at the university, you try to adopt a different approach with students, you see that they are very intelligent. They could ask very intelligent questions that you could learn from them all the time because they have different points of view. Because as we were discussing with Keanu, we don't, when we teach, we don't have to make possible that students have opinions, to create the opinions of students. We have to give them information. Then this information will be elaborated by the students with their own head, and in such a way the students will create their own opinion. And this is important in order to establish a fruitful relationship, which is good not only for students but for professors as well. And I repeat, it's a pity because students also in Europe, they will have huge potentialities. They're really smart and intelligent, but they're not used to, because sometimes they're scared just to ask questions because they think that can be considered stupid by the professor, or that the professor could get angry with them, something like that. Here we see that you have this kind of relationship which since the beginning puts students in the condition of expressing themselves. And if I have the opportunity of expressing myself, then I can grow up fastly.
Very empowering
Yes.
for a student to be able to say or ask questions that are difficult. And I know because before we started, we were already getting questions from some of the people that are sitting out there. I wanted to just comment on how lucky I think those students were from Kamehameha schools and the charter schools. Because what you're talking about is what the whole community needs, a kind of popular education approach where they learn from the beginning what exactly is international law and what does that have to do with me. That's not happening here in Hawaii, and it would be, you may have remembered at the Kamehameha schools,
The evening presentation.
the evening presentation, you have a bunch of people in the audience getting almost like raucous, getting a little rowdy over there because they need to express themselves in response to the things that you were saying.
And they were positively excited.
Yeah.
Yes, it was exciting.
But in fact, I was referring to the morning event. But more or less it was the same also in the evening event. The purpose was the same. The audience was different because in the morning we had high school students. In the evening we had any kind of people. But the purpose was the same, to spread knowledge.
And that evening was important for us because we didn't want to replicate what we did during the day. And that was 5 hours. We were with the students from 9 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the Do Cannery Ballroom. Beautiful place. Kamehameha Schools did an extraordinary job in providing a very conducive venue to be educated, to learn, to interact. Federica and I was able to mingle, talk. It was an exciting time. But the evening event was, again, education, but this is more procedural, educating them on not just international law and Hawaii's place, but also the procedural aspects of what's going on with the Commission of Inquiry. So what I needed to do, my portion of the evening event, which was well attended, close to 700 people was there. I was pleasantly surprised. Okay, I'll admit, I was shocked.
Yes, thrilled.
I was thrilled. I was like, wow.
You had the rowdy of the rowdy.
It was
seriously.
and it was real. It was, to me, it was real, you know, and it was excitement. It was as if you could feel an electricity in the air, you know, the kawila. It was just going, and a few times you hear the the hekili, the thando. But with the, so my part, and then I think maybe I can be followed with Federico so we can kind of follow along these lines, is that when what we needed to do was to show not just the procedural aspects of the Larson case. I had to actually explain the Larson case, how it got there, how do international procedures work with regard to our particular case, which laid the foundation to where we are now with the case. So I shared with the audience that from 1893 till today, there has been no lawful government in Hawaii. All governments, or claimed governments, that were here since 1893 to the present did not have any authority under Hawaiian law, none. They derived either through United States intervention, which created a puppet government of 1893, which we know as we call the provisional government, changed its name to the Republic. And then the territorial government and the state government derived their authority from the United States Congress. The problem we have there is that's American law that is limited to U.S. territory. So I had to explain that. Now, in light of that, specific steps were taken in 1995, following the history of governments in exile that were established in London during World War II, where private citizens or subjects of countries that fled German occupations formed provisional governments, temporary or acting governments, or pro tem. These are all terms that speak to governments created out of necessity. The importance, though, is that these governments in exile, by creating their governments out of necessity, did not represent the populace of the occupied state, but rather the state itself, to ensure compliance and that the state that is occupied is protected under international law. That's the function of a provisional government or a government in exile. I explained that we, as a result, established not a government in exile, but a government, provisional government, under the same principles and rules, but within Hawaii. And it was that government that had the responsibility, given the parameters of humanitarian law, to expose the occupation, to ensure the United States complies with the law of occupation. That is the purpose of the provisional government, the Hawaiian government of 1995. And there came, as a result, a dispute between a Hawaiian subject, his name is Lance Larson, who was arrested. Well, should I say, he was put on trial, which is an unfair trial, that's a war crime, which led to his incarceration of 30 days, 7 days solitary confinement. His attorney was alleging that the acting government or the provisional government did not protect her client, because that's what governments are supposed to do. And she's right. So when you assume the role of a government, you carry the vicarious responsibility of a government, even though you're a provisional government. Much like how a private in the Army can become an acting lieutenant. He is not a commissioned officer, but he still carries that vicarious responsibility and liability as if he was a commissioned officer. So that right there created a dispute which ultimately ended up at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So Lance Larson was alleging that the provisional government, the acting government, was negligent for allowing American laws to be imposed in Hawaii, which led to his rights being violated. Now, when the arbitration, before the arbitration could take place, that evening I explained the function of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which is very important. The Permanent Court of Arbitration is an intergovernmental organization. It is not a place where you have courts already set up or tribunals set up. It's an intergovernmental organization that creates ad hoc tribunals, meaning provisional tribunals limited to the dispute between parties. They don't have standing tribunals, like an ad hoc committee or versus a standing committee, right? So before the Permanent Court of Arbitration could accept the dispute that was under an agreement to arbitrate between the Hawaiian Kingdom and Lance Larson, where Lance Larson is coming after the acting government, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in order to create the tribunal, would first need to ensure that it had institutional jurisdiction. Basically what that means is one of the parties had to have been a state. Okay, so the permanent court can create a tribunal where you have a dispute between a state, which is a country, and a private entity. Okay. Now, when the arbitration agreement was submitted, a notification to arbitrate, Lance Larson's attorney initiated that process. The Permanent Court of Arbitration had to vet that answer that question. They weren't looking at Lance Larson. What they were looking at was the Hawaiian Kingdom as the defendant, whether or not it was a state. Because if it was not a state, but rather a group, a private group within a state, it would not create a tribunal, because that dispute, if it was within a state, would be up to the state to resolve whatever dispute they had. But to make it international, it had to be a state. And the Permanent Court of Arbitration verified that the Hawaiian Kingdom does exist as an independent state. Not that they chose that, but that there is no evidence that shows that the Hawaiian Kingdom is not a state. We show that it was, then where's the evidence that it's not? And this is there's a principle in international law called the presumption of continuity of a state despite its government having been overthrown. That helps to understand why the Permanent Court of Arbitration could only come to that conclusion in the absence of any evidence, because the United States, there is no treaty with the United States that Hawaii joined it. None. All we have is our American laws, which are the subject of the dispute that Lance Larson is accusing the acting government of allowing to be imposed. So what came out of the arbitration was basically Lance Larson could not proceed to hold the acting government accountable once the tribunal was created, could not hold the Hawaiian government accountable without the United States as a party, because a principal rule in international proceedings in courts or tribunals is that a tribunal or a court cannot determine the lawfulness or unlawfulness of the conduct of a state if that state is not a party to the proceedings. Now, people thought that these proceedings were about whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom exists. No, this was whether or not Lance Larson could hold accountable the acting government. The first stage of the Permanent Court of Arbitration had already vetted that process. Issues of Hawaii's independence may have become a part of the proceedings, but that was only between Lance Larson and the acting government. Now, so Lance could not proceed without the United States. But in its arbitration award, the tribunal clearly stated that there is the option for the parties to go to fact-finding, which is another process of resolution under the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And that's when Federico, his part, was speaking to the Fact-Finding Commission of Inquiry.
Yes, in fact, the arbitral tribunal was unable to provide any answer on the merits of the case, on the substance of the case, exactly for the rule of the indispensable third party, which was not party to the dispute, to the proceedings. But this rule does not apply to fact-finding proceedings. So through the establishment of a fact-finding commission of inquiry, it will be possible to have some answers concerning the question, the basic questions of the Larson case. So as Keanu was saying earlier, the commission, we have first of all to ascertain which is the role of the Hawaiian Kingdom, generally speaking, under international humanitarian law, and especially what are the duties and responsibilities of the Hawaiian Kingdom towards Lance Larson, and a fortiori towards any Hawaiian citizen living in Hawaii or abroad, and also towards aliens who have relationships with the other Hawaiian territory. So anybody who came here to visit the land, the country. Mm. And there is a procedure to follow. The International Bureau of the Permanent Court of Arbitration will provide logistic assistance throughout all the process. The Commission will sit at The Hague in the Netherlands, because The Hague is the place where the Permanent Court of Arbitration is located at the Peace Palace, together with the International Court of Justice. And I don't think it's necessary to speak about the details of the procedure. But one very important point is that any elements of the proceedings, including the final determinations by the Commission, will be made public. And this is important because it will give a contribution to spreading knowledge, to spreading the information about what really happened in a way.
Your job as advocate and counselor is to move this process along?
Yes, it's to help to move this process along and to help with the procedure. Of course, I live in Europe, so I'm in a better position than Keanu.
He's closer to The Hague.
Yes, I can fly to The Hague daily without any problem. And so for anything necessary, I can provide my contribution. And starting from the next step, which will be that of nominating and appointing authority. The appointing authority is very important because this authority will have the task to establish who the commissioners will be. And we are working on that right now, and we have already reached an agreement with
Lance Larson's attorney.
Yes, with the attorney Lance Larson. So this should be done within a few weeks.
Can you explain a little bit what the appointing authority is and how you get it? How does that happen?
The appointing authority is should be a person well known in the context of international law, and which gives guarantees of being beyond parties, of impartiality, and also must have the capacity and the knowledge to appoint the commissioners, to know whose person would be the most appropriate in order to be members of this International Commission of Inquiry.
And to answer that question within the agreement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have someone in mind? Just curious.
We may have somebody in mind.
We've been discussing.
Okay,
Yes.
so is there anything more that you could share with us about this process without revealing anything that's not ready?
Well, I think what's important and why the appointing authority is crucial is these are international proceedings, and transparency is very important so that it cannot be perceived as if the commission is acting for or on behalf of one of the parties.
Yes.
It has to be neutral. Now, the appointing authority is important because they work with, or that person works with the International Bureau of the Permanent Court, who facilitates the establishment of the commission to provide a list of names of possible commissioners with their background, their expertise, so that each party will receive from the commissioner, from the appointing authority, through the Bureau, a list of names, and these names, the appointing authority should be confident that they have some relevancy to the issue at hand.
Yes, they have the capacity,
Capacity.
the expertise,
Yeah.
and as I was emphasizing earlier, the impartiality to deal with the issue. Of course, in these cases, it is important to avoid to have people on board who are biased for whatever part.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, what we are looking for is a body which is able to ascertain the facts. So able to provide the truth of what happened in the Hawaiian Kingdom and to the Hawaiian Kingdom and to the people living and interacting with the Hawaiian Kingdom under the perspective of international law.
Are you able to challenge if the appointing authority appoints people that you think are less than or not exactly impartial?
Oh, absolutely. If we have reason to believe that one of them may be, well, not that we would challenge, we would know, and that would get us to not pick that person. So this is how it would work. And it's very similar to how the tribunal was established in the Larson case. I would have to assume the procedures must be similar, you know? So the appointing authority would identify a list of possible commissioners for each party. In the case of the Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom, the Hawaiian government selected Professor Christopher Greenwood because of his background in the law of occupation. And Ninia Parks, the attorney for Lance Larson, selected Gavin Griffith, former Solicitor General to the Australian government, but also a representative of Australia of that East Timor case, which had the indispensable third-party issue at hand. Now, once we agreed on those two arbitrators, just as we would agree to two commissioners, then it will be up to those commissioners to appoint, or not appoint, nominate a presiding commissioner, but still subject to our agreement. Yeah. So you always have these checks that are there to ensure neutrality and impartiality. And it's very crucial that the steps taken to ensure integrity of this commission is far more important, I would say, to anything they would say after.
Yes, of course. Because if all the world can see the impartiality of the commission, then of course what the commission is going to say would be reliable.
Yep.
No?
Yep.
Otherwise, would be quite useless to have established this International Commission of Inquiry. There is one point that I would like to specify, because a few minutes ago we were talking about information that we may disclose. In reality, we don't have any secret.
Yeah,
I mean, we are,
it's all procedural.
Yes,
not substantive.
The only point was the identity of the appointing authority. Since the appointing authority has not been nominated yet, it would not be opportune to give names on the basis of what we have in mind at present, because we have to think about the identity of the appointed authority a little bit more. So it would be misleading to give a name or another, because then in the end the appointing authority could be a different person. No?
But once appointed, it's public.
Oh yes.
Yes.
So
what does your timeline look like? Can you disclose that?
Oh yeah. See, so there are issues that when we say we can't disclose are really just the procedural aspects of accomplishing certain things. It's not, might say, it's not confidential unless it's because of state matters. But these are procedural, and we have to ensure that, one, we follow the procedures to the letter, but we also are very mindful of everyday events, human understanding. So it's not so regimented, but you're dealing with people. And that's why with the designation of the appointing authority, we have an idea of a few. And we needed to meet with the attorney for Lance Larson to agree to pursuing these individuals, but not to pick any individual, but just to inquire and to see if they will be agreeable to serving as the appointing authority. Now, Lynette, you brought up earlier Federico's role as the counsel and advocate. So these terms, such as the term for me is an agent. So I'm not a law enforcement agent or an agent for the FBI. But in international proceedings, agents are the head of a legal team that represents a state. In this case, it represents a state. An agent wouldn't represent Lance Larson, that's counsel. Right? So Ninia Parks in the Larson case was referred to as counsel in the arbitration, but I was referred to as agent, and then I had a deputy agent and a second deputy agent. Now, in this case, I'm still the agent, so I was there from the beginning of the case, so I have a lot of background of working with the Permanent Court of Arbitration that I can use from my experience to move this further. But what I needed was a counsel, legal counsel, to advise, and an advocate to represent. So an advocate is to represent my legal team, the Hawaiian Kingdom, in this case for Federico in Europe, so that he could also be our representative before the Permanent Court of Arbitration, instead of having me flying all the way to The Hague just to have a short meeting. But as counsel, though, counsel is, Federico provides me counsel, legal understandings. I rely on him to give me his opinion. And I rely on his opinion because I know his background. And that's our role. So normally in proceedings, you have the agent, deputy agent, counsel, advocate. Yeah. So those are just the terms that are used as titles within international proceedings.
Yeah, in reality then we exchange opinions, we exchange ideas, and of course all the strategy to be followed will be agreed together.
Yep.
Because Keanu is a huge expert of international law, especially as regards international arbitration and the proceedings in front of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So every step to be moved will be decided jointly.
Yes. So when Federico and I have been exchanging, what happens is, as a result, Federico has realized that I have the expertise in international law. He has the expertise in international law, but it doesn't mean I know everything about international law. and same with Federico.
Nobody knows everything.
Exactly.
About anything.
So as we exchange, I have to admit Federico is a very good legal counsel. And his focus is for the Hawaiian Kingdom, not for Keanu, not for Federico.
Of course.
But our responsibility is to the Hawaiian state. And we have that we carry that responsibility. We take that very serious.
Yeah, especially after the night event of last Monday, because when you see when you watch the people face to face, and you see their hopes, their expectations, then you become responsibilized in any way. You feel the responsibility stronger and stronger, because in the end, of course, Keanu is struggling for his own land, for the land of his ancestors, of his parents, and the land which will be the land of his children and grandchildren.
Which is the country, not my
yes.
personal land.
Yes,
my country.
This is not my case, but I think when you establish such a relationship with the people, and you can see that they count on you, they trust you, in order for their hopes to become reality, then I think that you feel the responsibility in a way which goes beyond your belonging to a country or to an ethnicity or to anybody else.
You could see that, huh?
Yes, of
Yes.
course. We could see that, because I don't want to overemphasize our role, of course, but Monday night, I think that many people woke up and realized that what they really want for their country.
You know, if I can add on that evening, the final question presented by Umi, asking what can Hawaiian subjects do to help? And Federico said, you must believe.
Yes.
You must know, you must love your country. Now, that evening, my auntie picked up her granddaughter, who's a UH student, at the dorms, and they went to Zippy's. And that's my niece. She couldn't make it because she had some prior engagements. But they went to Zippy's, and my niece's friends, who were political science students, Hawaiians, going back to the dorm, they stopped by at Zippy's, and they came in, and they were so excited that from the presentation on Monday evening, and they just started yelling, "We believe."
Yes,
we believe.
It was really great, a huge emotion. Why I was saying you have to believe, and seeing these people standing up and saying, "I believe."
Yes.
Was really great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's what happens, you know, because we're all in the audience. We don't have any idea what you see and what you feel. Everything's directed at you, towards the front. We can look around in the back and we can see that people are pretty excited, but not the full force that you got.
Oh, we could see everything.
Yes.
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 I am just really happy to hear it.
And we could see the reactions and the change of attitude from the beginning to the end of the event, which was a progressive change.
We could hear it. You know, where we were sitting, you could hear the change based on what people were saying and starting to yell. So yeah, we could feel it too, but not with the force you had.
It was like at the beginning somebody was thinking, who's this guy? What is doing here? And then in the end it was a good achievement to see that at least they were convinced that I was there for a reason. Of course, Keanu is very well known here.
Yes, and people do get some like, it's him.
Yes.
But we want to hear you. So I think that you were the new thing injected into the dialogue. You're new. The concept, the position that you hold, this is all new. And so we're all very happy about it. Keanu, you have closing comments you want to make?
Well, I think it's to bring Federico here. He brings that international persona. So much here, it's been so parochial. It's like internal, or between us and the United States. But our people forget that we have treaties with other countries. And Federico is from Italy, and we have a treaty with Italy dated 1863. And that is the opening up of Europe to look at our situation. But we have to own our situation, and we have to do our homework. And I think for Federico to come in, he came in because we did our homework. He didn't come in to teach us. Federico did not come here to teach me what I need to do. But I reached out to Federico with his expertise and me sharing what I do, and he came on board. It became collaborative. And I think that is, if anything, is the road to be on as we spread this out. It's collaboration, not being adversarial, right? We're moving toward a solution.
Well, thank you for helping us to raise our credibility, because that's kind of like what's going on, right? Thank you for joining us today, Federico, and you also, Keanu, and I'm Lynette Cruz, and thank you guys for joining Issues That Matter, and we'll see you guys next time. Mahalo.